Well, welcome to another MVP Monday. It's so good to have you with us, and whichever platform that you're watching on, if this is the first time, welcome. If you're back again, then, well, welcome. We obviously didn't put you off the first time. So this evening, this is what we're going to be doing. We're going to be taking you to some content that I recorded a couple of months ago, but it was such a significant message that I really wanted to use it in the build-up to the launch of our MVP journey, which is going to be available very, very soon. MVP journey, what is it? It's a 7-step journey that you can go on that helps you to discover your mission, to understand the values that are going to drive the person that you need to become to deliver that mission, and then the plan that's going to inform the priorities that you have each day, so that your mission isn't just some fantasy that is way off in the future, that is wishful thinking, but it's an actual plan giving you actual steps to deliver on that mission. And so we're going to be launching that very, very soon. But in these Mondays leading up to that launch, which is going to be in April, by the way, I want to be sowing some seed. I want to be laying the foundation on some really important principles, all of which are going to be enhanced and going to go deeper on some of these principles on the journey. But this is going to help you prepare the ground, prepare your mindset, prepare your thought process to get a little bit of insight into kind of the source material, as it were, behind the course. So I hope you enjoy the next half an hour or so. Put some comments if you're watching this live. What's standing out to you? What's getting you thinking? There's going to be some aha moments. I just know it. I know there are going to be some keys that are going to turn some locks that have been locked for a long, long time in your belief system, in your mindset. So let's be expectant. Get a notepad ready. Get your device. Make some notes. Stick some comments in. And I'll see the other side of this content. And then I'll tell you more about the MVP journey that is coming up. Enjoy. So I want to show you a concept that has become so clear over this past month. And we're going to start in Judges, and we're going to look at the story of Gideon. Then we're going to jump over into Luke chapter 1, and we're going to look at the story of Mary. And let me remind you, High Performance Disciple is about understanding that when you combine spiritual principles with high performance strategies, that it is an explosive combination that can have extraordinary and exponential impact on our world and the world. So we're looking for those principles, those timeless principles that are not subject to culture, time, geography. They're not subject to personality. They are tried and tested. They are rooted and grounded in the foundation and fabric of the universe that God has created. They are laws that can't be broken. They are laws that can be relied upon. They are laws that become predictors of what can happen when we abide by them and we align ourselves to them. And then the strategies. What are the things that we need to do in response to those principles? What are the ways in which our attitudes, our behavior, and our daily disciplines can align to those principles that bring about that explosive effect and impact and activate, I believe, the seeds of desire that God has placed inside of your heart. Those seeds that may look like a picture of a future that in your own strength and your own ability, you're thinking, I'm not sure I could ever do that. I'm not sure that that's within the realms of reality. But you combine you plus God, then you plus God equals anything is possible. So let's jump in to Judges chapter 6, and we're going to have a good look at Gideon's story. Judges chapter 6. And again, for the sake of time, I'm not going to read whole chunks of the passage. You can go away and do that. But we're going to look at Judges 6 and 7. And again, it might help for you either to pause now and to go and read Judges 6 and 7 to remind yourself of the story, or you can journey this with me. So Judges chapter 6, we find the Israelites in an oppressed situation. They are in a place where they are being dominated by the Midianites. The Midianites were a superpower compared to the Israelites. This was a mismatch in terms of pitting the Midianites against the Israelites. This was, I use the football analogy, and go with me if you understand this. It's like pitting Man City against Dorking. I'm not even sure it's Dorking Town or Dorking United of the National League. You know, just poles apart in totally different stratospheres of the game. That's the kind of comparison, I guess, between these two nations. And Israel were in this position of being dominated because they'd done evil in the eyes of the Lord. So the first verse says the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and for 7 years he gave them into the hands of the Midianites. And because the power of Midian was so oppressive, the Israelites prepared shelters for themselves in mountain clefts, caves, and strongholds. And whenever the Israelites planted their crops, the Midianites, Amalekites, and other eastern peoples invaded the country. They camped on the land and ruined the crops all the way to Gaza and did not spare a living thing for Israel, neither sheep nor cattle nor donkeys. And he goes on to say in verse 6, Midian so impoverished the Israelites that they cried out to the Lord for help. So what we find here is we find Israel in a position that is not God's design. God's design is not for you or I to be in a place of being dominated. When God created mankind in Genesis 1:26-28, we have the cultural mandate. The cultural mandate is the intention of God, which has never changed. It's not been altered or changed because man sinned and therefore God screw up the paper of the plan that he originally had and then thought, well, we're going to have to start again. Let's come up with something completely different. Christ was sent as the final Adam, not the second Adam. There wasn't going to be a third or a fourth. He was the final Adam. He came as a substitute to play out that role that Adam failed in, to get us back into a position where we could fulfill the cultural mandate. What's the cultural mandate, Gareth? The cultural mandate, again, we could do a deep dive into this, and maybe we'll do in the coming months. But the cultural mandate is, if you go and read Genesis 1:26-28, it's where God says, let us make man in our image. In our image, in our likeness, let us make him. And of course, that's the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, the Trinity coming together as one and saying, we're going to make man different to all the other species on the earth. Whereas all the other animals were made out of or were spoken into being, or were made out of the dirt. Of course, mankind was made out of the dirt, but ultimately the breath of God was breathed into mankind, which meant that whereas animals have physical beings, I would even say animals have souls. And when I talk about souls, I'm talking about some form of emotional capacity. But what they don't have is they don't have spirits. And spirits that's the part that connects us to God. Sometimes people use souls and they interchange soul with spirit, but I separate soul from spirit. For me, soul is that emotional capacity. It's why an animal can feel scared. An animal can feel a level of emotion. You know, you can look at chimpanzees and you can clearly see that they get upset. My wife was watching a video the other day about a chimpanzee who had been taken away from her baby because she had to have some operation or something, and then she was reunited, and there was this emotion from this chimpanzee to this baby. And so clearly animals have an emotional capacity, but what they don't have is they don't have a spiritual capacity. And that's the part that separates mankind from every other creature. In that spiritual capacity, it is our God capacity. It is the likeness of God that enables us to operate from an imagination, from a place of creativity. We don't have to fulfill the cycles, the predictable cycles connected to our genetics. whereas other animals will just follow within the circle of life, as it were. Where animals are in that predictable cycle, mankind has the ability to opt in or opt out, to create, to innovate, to change, to dominate or to be dominated. And so when God gave mankind the cultural mandate, he said, multiply, increase, subdue, have dominion over the earth. In other words, everything that you can see, I have created you to dominate. Now, let me just make it clear here. Man is not meant to dominate man. Man is meant to dominate his or her environment, not one another. That's where it's gone wrong with sin. But we are to have dominion. We are not to be creatures who allow our environment to dominate us. Now, in this situation, Israel had sinned. And when we give way to sin, we end up becoming dominated by our environment. We become dominated by temptation. We become dominated by essentially violating the principles and philosophy of God. So again, that's a long-winded way around of just introducing this, but I think it's really important to understand that, because high-performance disciples are people who have had enough, and I do mean that, have had enough of being dominated. Everything within them wants to have dominion, to subdue, to rule, to have control, because there's a divine aspect of us that is created for that. And so when we don't feel that we're in that position, we feel like we are out of alignment with our very nature, and of course we are. So the Israelites were out of alignment with their nature. They were the people of God, and yet they certainly weren't in the position that God had for them. So God was looking for someone who could alter the story. And of course he found Gideon. Now let's jump into verse 7. When the Israelites cried out to the Lord because of Midian, he sent them a prophet who said, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. I rescued from the hand of the Egyptians, and I delivered you from the hand of all your oppressors. I drove them out before you and gave you their land. I said to you, I am the Lord your God. Do not worship the God of the Amorites in whose land you live, but you have not listened to me." Now notice again, cultural mandate. When you align yourself to my image, you have dominion. You're able to possess, to occupy. But when you go worshipping other idols, you essentially start to build your self-image on the image that you become intimate with. That's why God is a jealous God. He's not a jealous God because he's insecure. He's a jealous God because the potential that is in you is only activated when you are intimate with him. Why? Because our potential needs to be aligned to the image in us that is able to activate that potential. So God is actually jealous, I believe, for the potential that is in us. Why? Because that potential is required for his salvation plan to come about. So God appears in verse 11 to Gideon. And of course, we know, as is the case throughout the whole of the Bible narrative, that God doesn't choose or pick ready-made people. People who have got the CV and they've got all the boxes ticked. He chooses the unlikely people. People like you, people like me, people like Gideon. And people like Mary, of course, which of course we'll jump across to in a few moments. But the angel of the Lord, verse 11, came and sat down under the oak in Ophrah that belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, where his son Gideon was threshing wheat in a winepress to keep it from the Midianites. When the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." Lots to be said here, but I'm going to keep it brief. Gideon had hidden himself in a winepress. He was in a place where there was a lid on him. And he was acting out in his own individual life the narrative of the Israelites, which was, you hide away because you are being dominated. He was hidden away in fear. when we hide away, it is a reminder that we're operating according to our sinful nature, not our God nature. What happened when mankind brought himself from under the jurisdiction and reliance upon God in the Garden of Eden? He hid. They hid. You see, suddenly we become self-conscious the moment we become out of alignment with the image of God in us. The moment we try and start to form our own image, we become self-conscious. So Gideon, just like the Israelites, were hiding away. They were hiding away in mountain cliffs. They were hiding away in caves. They were hiding away in wine presses. Question to you right now, are you hiding? Now, it's not. I don't think it's just a case of being as binary as yes or no. I think there are environments where we don't hide, and we've kind of got a level of dominion and breakthrough, but there are other areas and environments where we do hide. And I believe in this coming season, the challenge is that God needs people who are willing not to hide anymore. Not to hide. To come out of hiding. But in order for us to come out of hiding, we've got to overcome the self-consciousness. And to overcome the self-consciousness, we've got to have a fresh revelation of who we are. And let me just say that, there's a layer behind that. For us to have a fresh revelation of who we are, we've got to have a fresh revelation of whose we are. So the angel of the Lord came and said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." Now immediately there's a contradiction. And Gideon recognizes the contradiction because the angel declares on behalf of God, God's perspective. And God's perspective is never bound by time. God's perspective is an eternal perspective. Eternity is not wrapped up in time, therefore it is the fullness of truth and reality. So when God speaks, he speaks from the end to the now. He doesn't speak from the now. And so he sees Gideon exactly as he is. But the problem is Gideon, like you and I, are influenced and impacted by the fact that we are in time. We are partway through the story. We have our baggage from our past. We have our experience. We have our failures. We have all the things that we've seen, and they become sometimes the shapers of our identity. We are more convinced by our track record than we are by our heritage in who we are in Christ. And so immediately Gideon replies, "Pardon me, my Lord," Gideon replied, "but if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Where are all his wonders that our ancestors told us about when they said, 'Did not the Lord bring us out of Egypt?' But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the hand of the Midian." So what God does is, in order for us to get into the position where he can start to truly open up doors of influence, to shape culture and to shape society, he has to deal with identity. And identity, your identity and my identity, Gideon's identity, Mary's identity, as we will look at, is the story that we're telling ourselves. You see, the story that Gideon was telling himself was that he was the least in his family, that his family, in fact, he goes on to say, "How can I save Israel?" Verse 15. "How can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my family." So the story that I believe is that I can't be chosen because of my heritage. I can't be chosen because of my current predicament and my circumstances. And so the story that we tell ourselves literally becomes the lid. He's in this wine press with a lid on. It becomes the lid that holds us back. Now, let me jump into Luke chapter 1. Because I want to pause there with Gideon. We'll come back to Gideon in a moment, but let's jump to Luke chapter 1, because in Luke chapter 1, this is when the angel appears to Mary. And Luke chapter 1, verse 26 says this: "In the 6th month of Elizabeth's pregnancy, God sent the angel Gabriel to Nazareth, a town in Galilee, to a virgin pledged to be married to a man named Joseph, a descendant of David. The virgin's name was Mary. The angel went to her and said, 'Greetings, you who are highly favored. The Lord is with you.' Mary was greatly troubled at his words and wondered what kind of greeting this might be. But the angel said to her, 'Do not be afraid, Mary. You have found favor with God. You will conceive and give birth to a son, and you are to call him Jesus. He will be great and will be called the Son of the Most High. The Lord God will give him the throne of his father David, and he will reign over Jacob's descendants forever. His kingdom will never end. How will this be, Mary? Asked the angel, since I am a virgin. So immediately, again, it happens every single time when God steps in from the eternal perspective into the now and brings that eternal perspective, it produces a contradiction. You see, when you bring the end of the story into chapter 2 or chapter 3, there's a contradiction because there's a whole heap of stuff that hasn't yet happened. But God does that because he creates a contradiction, because the contradiction is what is going to realign our identity. It's going to take it from being that self-conscious nature that hides itself to being a God-confident nature that is willing to be seen. Again, Jesus said in Matthew chapter 5 in his manifesto of the Sermon on the Mount, that you are the light of the world, that you are to be seen and not hidden. You're not to hide your light or you're under a lamp. You are not to position yourself in a place where you can't be seen. In fact, you are a city that is set on a hill, he says. And a city that is set on a hill is seen. People come to the city that is set on the hill because it's lit up at night. So again, the identity, the story that we're telling ourselves is usually a point of conflict when God starts to speak. The angel appears to Mary. Number one, you're going to be with child, but hang on a minute, I'm a virgin and I'm not yet married. So that creates an immediate problem for Mary. It creates a cultural problem for Mary, because if she's to be with child and people know that she's not married, even though she knows it comes about through a miraculous conception, the reality is that it's going to create a whole load of problems for her. But you see, the moment that God speaks, we've got to be willing to change the story that we're telling ourselves. And that's easier said than done. It's a simple thing, but it's not an easy thing. It's the story that we're telling ourselves is not only a conscious narrative, it's a subconscious narrative. It's something that is shaping a good chunk of our daily choices and decisions that we're making. We always choose and operate out of that identity. Our identity is like the operating system of the device or computer that you're watching on right now. Your operating system determines the apps that you can download and you can operate. If you don't have an up-to-date operating system, then certain applications cannot be used. You can be given an application by God that says, this is what I want you to do. This is the plan that I've got for you. But if you've not got an operating system on which that application can work, then there's a challenge. God has to do a deeper work in us in order to bring the operating system up to update it and to bring it to a place where the application can work. And so for Mary, that's exactly what happened. And the great thing is with Mary, as we will see with Gideon, is that there was a receptivity to the story being changed. And you may say, well, surely everybody, Gareth, is willing for their story to be changed. Let me say right now, this is what separates high-performance disciples from other people who follow Christ. Because ultimately, you can be a follower of Christ, and there's a proximity that you can be at that will determine the level of change that you'll experience. We know that people believed in Jesus, but he wouldn't have them around him. There were people that walked away from Jesus because his teaching became too hard. We're not told that they walked away from him and stopped believing. But we just know that the level of proximity to Jesus, which, by the way, determined the level of impact those disciples could have, was determined by the willingness that they had to have their story shaped and changed. So let's jump back to Gideon, because what happens next, of course, is quite significant. And there's a key thing that God says to Gideon that I think is so significant, and significant for the months and the year that is ahead. So after this exchange of words that Gideon has with the angel, with the Lord, God says this through the angel: the Lord said to him, Go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you? So it's really interesting because right now it doesn't look like Gideon has any strength. In fact, what we see is more weakness than strength. But God always speaks to what we carry, even if it's not our current reality. You see, our potential is our capability and capacity to deliver on what God has assigned for us to do. But we may not be living in the reality of that, in the experience of that. Let me use another analogy maybe that could help us. So I could say, right, I've deposited $10 million or pounds into your bank account right now. But if you don't believe me, then you're not going to go and check that bank account, and you're not going, that 10 million is still yours, but you're not going to live in the reality of it. It's not going to have any bearing or influence on your daily life. So can you see how you can be in possession of something but not having activated it? So God says to him, he says, go in the strength that you have. You see, our lives are like seeds. A seed has the ability inside of itself to deliver on its future. It doesn't need anything external to be injected into it. Now, yes, it needs an environment in which to grow. It needs an environment that is conducive for it to grow and develop. But ultimately, everything that the seed needs for the future of the seed is in the seed. The strength that you need for today, the strength that you need for tomorrow, the strength that you need for the next year to be elevated, to have a seat at that table that God has for you, to be in that position of influence, it's in you. You have the strength, but you have to activate the strength. You have to activate, and we can only activate the strength once we start believing the story and changing the story and the narrative that we have for ourselves. And so Gideon, again, we're going to fast forward. There's so much there's layers here, but we're going to fast forward. So Gideon, of course, believes that. He accepts the word that is given to him. Let me just jump across to Mary, because in verse 35, how will this be? Since I'm a virgin, the angel answered, the Holy Spirit will come upon you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. So the Holy One to be born will be called the Son of God. Even Elizabeth, your relative, is going to have a child in her old age, and she who was said to be unable to conceive is in her 6th month. For no word from God will ever fail. For no word from God will ever fail. Mary's response, I am the Lord's servant. May your word to me be fulfilled. Then the angel left her. She was open to the story being changed. She was open to the fact that even though her current reality didn't seem to fit the narrative of what was being presented to her, that the current reality of her, even her physical body being told that now she is with child, even though that didn't add up to her, she accepted it. She went in the strength that she had. She trusted in the story she was told. You see, the story that you're told and the strength that you have, which ultimately comes from God, when you combine them together daily and immerse yourself in His story and His strength that is in you, then you create the environment for the seed of impact and influence to take place and to grow and to develop. It's not a magic wand that suddenly brings about an overnight success or an overnight breakthrough. Sure, there are suddenly moments, but suddenly moments usually come out of after long periods of time where that seed, that story has been germinating, has been allowed to grow and to develop. You create an internal environment that is conducive for that seed to grow. So Mary accepted the word. We know from, is it Mark's gospel? I think it's Mark's gospel in the account of the parable of the sower, that it said it's the seed that you receive and accept that produces the 30, 60, 100-fold. The seed that you accept, the seed that we hear that we don't necessarily accept. There's a difference between hearing something and accepting something. The journey of hearing it and accepting it from here to here is the ultimate determining factor over what happens to that seed. And I guess if you want a couple of questions just to go and think on, what's the story that I'm believing? The story that I'm believing. Gideon had a story that he was believing, that the eternal perspective of the angel of God came and challenged. The story that I'm believing is what I believe I am, I can, I will, I have. Okay, so who I believe I am, what I can do, what I'm capable of, what I have possession of, what I have the ability to do, that I am this kind of a person. Again, the story that I believe is, again, it can be limited by maybe a lineage. People from my family don't get to do that, or people from my ethnic background won't have the platform for this to take place. There's so many different kind of narratives around the story that we believe. But ultimately, while they may be very real experiences of what our life has been like up to now, ultimately the true explanation of our story comes from God, from an eternal perspective. And so right now, what's the story that you're believing that is limiting you? What's the story that you're believing that's limiting you? What's your wine press? What's your wine press? What words, like the angel brought to Mary, do we almost need to allow to trouble us? The word troubled Mary. It didn't trouble her in the sense that it made her scared. It made her aware. Again, holy fear is different from negative fear. Negative fear diminishes as it shrinks, as it causes us to hide. Holy fear actually causes us to expand. We become aware of what we need to shed in order for us to grow into who he's called us to be. And then the second question, so what's the story that I need to change? The second question is, what am I truly capable of doing that I have yet to activate? So when God said to Gideon, go in the strength that you have, he already had the capability, but he wasn't activating it. What's the strength that I have? And I believe it is sequential. So I don't think you can answer this question until you've answered the first question, because ultimately your story that you believe is the lens through which you're able to see your capability. But what are you capable of? What has God made you capable of? And I believe the capability is connected to the assignment. When God gives you an assignment, again, it comes back to the word, the line here that the angel says, for no word from God will ever fail. Every word that God gives is like a seed. And we know that the word of God is seed, again, parable of the sower. Every seed carries inside of itself the capability and the capacity to fulfill what it is. So when God says, go in the strength that you have the strength to do what he's asking you to do. When God spoke the word to Mary, in the word that was given was the capacity to have miraculously conceived in her womb the Messiah, Jesus Christ. The word gives way to presence. The word gives way to the promise. So the word that we are given carries the capability and capacity. And so we have to, you see, before you can jump into the what am I supposed to do in my life, or how am I supposed to get from A to C? What does B look like? And that's been a big thing for me this year. Looking at the almost the leap between the chasm of A and C. If A and C were almost like the peaks of two mountains, and then B in the middle is this valley, and it just how do I get from A to C, God? And so often we can get caught up with those questions, and those are important questions to answer, and we're going to answer those. In fact, we're going to answer those in our next conversation. But the way that you discover the how and the what is by, first of all, getting in place the who and the why. What's the story that I am believing, my identity? Who? Why am I alive? What's the capability that God has given to me that I need to activate? And again, the why that I'm alive is my ability to contribute. It's my ability to deliver. And this is what I want to kind of bring here. In fact, I'm gonna park here. I'm gonna be a bit cruel and kind of leave you, I guess, perched on the edge here of the next part of what I want to deliver. But I promise I will deliver it to you. But when we realize, I think it's 2 Corinthians chapter 5, where Paul talks about we have this treasure in earthen vessel. We have this treasure in jars of clay. We have to understand the difference between the container and the contents. You see, again, Mary's story is a brilliant story to example this, but it's the same pattern for every character that we carry, that we have in the Bible. Mary was a container, and our story is about being a container that carries glorious contents. The problem comes when, again, and this comes back to the cultural mandate, when we come out of alignment with God, our value is determined by the container. We spend our whole lives trying to build a pretty container, a beautiful container, a container that is going to be admired. And our container can be our career. Our container can be our material assets and resources, our net worth. Our container can be our physical appearance. It can be many different things. It can be accolades, trophies, letters after our names. And there's nothing wrong with any of those things. But ultimately, the container does one thing. It carries contents to deliver those contents from one place to another. And so we can spend our whole life on the container and totally ignore the contents. And your purpose and my purpose is not about me. It's not about you. It's about delivering the contents that God has deposited inside of us. And for Mary understood that this, whilst is a message being given to me, this actually isn't about me. I am a container carrying the contents that just so happens to be the Son of God, the Messiah. And I am going to yield myself and surrender myself to be fit for purpose. The purpose of delivering the contents. The moment I make my purpose about me, I suddenly make it about the container and not the contents, which is, if you were to use the analogy of, you were sending something to somebody, something that was precious through the delivery system, somebody taking it and either flying it or delivering it via van or car or whatever. Ultimately, you package it, but it's all about the contents. In fact, the packaging is, and how you package something is usually connected to the contents. If it's fragile, there'll be lots of packaging to protect it. If it's something of size, then again, you get an appropriate package. The whole idea of the package is built around the contents, but what the enemy will try and get us to do is to make our whole lives about the package. And when we do that and we lose joy because something in us isn't aligned. And so Mary absolutely teaches us that the joy is in recognizing and knowing I am just a container. Being a high-performance disciple, it's learning to separate the container from the contents. That actually, even though I may see a container that looks ordinary, everyday, almost unlikely to carry the contents that I do have, ultimately I am just a container. But what I do have is I have stewardship of the contents. And I have to steward the contents. I have to realize that that my inability to value the container, I have to be careful that that doesn't suddenly determine how I treat the contents. Some of us are mistreating the contents because we determine the value of the contents by the container. But we have to really spend some time on those two questions. Who am I? What's the story that I believe? Why am I alive? What am I truly capable of? And learn to distinguish between container and contents. And recognize today that your intrinsic value is determined by the contents and not the container. God saw you as fit for purpose to carry the most incredible contents. What's that contents? It's the glory of God. What's the glory of God? It's the solution on heaven's solution to earth's problems. That's the glory of God. That's the simplest way. Now, there's the term glory is multifaceted, but in simple man's terms, for me, the glory of God is heaven's solution to earth's problem. God wants to manifest his glory on earth as it is in heaven. What does that look like? It looks like solving a problem. That looks like through your career, through your pathway, through the business that you run or the business that you believe you'll run, through the role that you have or the role that you are aspiring to move to, that you will bring a solution to a problem. And that is the delivery of the contents, the glory of God. And recognize that you will deliver that glory if you can learn to separate the contents from the container and recognize that the container needs to believe the right story, that I will deliver this, that I am capable because God has put this contents in me, this value in me, this strength in me, and I will deliver this, and ultimately will bring glory to him. Fantastic. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. I hope that got you thinking. We're going to be putting out clips of that talk throughout the week. If you are already subscribed to our mailing list, then you will get that. But if you have not yet subscribed, then why don't you sign up for the MVP plan? Just watch this clip about the MVP plan, which you can download now for free, and then I'll come back to finish off with.
In every episode of the Winning Life podcast and here on MVP Monday, you will hear Gareth and Leanne talk about the importance of getting a plan for your personal and professional life. That's why they have developed the MVP plan. When you develop your MVP plan, surprising opportunities and uncommon results follow. The MVP plan provides you with a clear structure to begin to see how your goals can turn into reality. Starting out with setting the goals, highlighting milestones, and planning individual tasks, you'll begin to see how the MVP plan is key to experiencing the results you've always wanted to have in order to make an impact in this world. Visit thewinninglife.tv today to get access to your plan and the steps on how to use it.
April the 17th. Put it in your diary. That is the day that the MVP journey is going to be available for you to access. And so I can't wait for you to get into this journey. There are going to be multiple ways in which you can take the content and turn it into something that brings the journey alive for you, that helps you to really make measurable progress on your development journey or your discipleship journey. So April the 17th, mark it in your diaries, mark it on your calendar, and it is going to be the start of a phenomenal, transformative journey. Well, thank you for joining us again on MVP Mondays. Can't wait till next Monday and to speak to you soon. Take care, and don't forget to join us for our podcast. I almost forgot. On Wednesday and Fridays, myself and Leanne deliver these out, looking at everyday questions that we have to process as human beings, as people who want to grow and develop. And so make sure you go and subscribe to the Winning Life.tv on YouTube, on all podcast platforms. And again, we'll just close off with the trailer of the latest episode, and we'll see you soon. Take care. Good night. Welcome to episode 19. How can I manage my thoughts?
I have a daily battle with thoughts. I think we all do.
Well, let's start there.
Okay. Because I've mulled over these thoughts that actually nothing's happened. I'm just catastrophizing in my head.
Our thoughts are either rooted in fear or faith. You don't run away from thoughts. If anything, actually, you run to them and you manage them.
I would phone my parents every day and say to them, I think I'm going to die. Because it was so real. I felt like I was going to die. This is not supposed to happen on a podcast.